Hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I want to talk to you about a really cool feature of the AWS Organisations Service called Backup Policies. This allows you to enforce backup strategies, define backup plans and backup rules for all of the various AWS accounts that you manage as part of an AWS Organisations service. This video will walk you through an entire tutorial so that you can have hands-on experience in setting this up for your own organization. Let's do this. So AWS organizations allow you to define backup policies, which can help you centrally define and enforce automated backup rules across multiple accounts, all of the member accounts in your organization. They ensure consistent backup schedules, retention, and lifecycle management for resources such as EC2, EBS, RDS, DynamoDB, EFS, and more. Now, in terms of the features that they offer, so with backup policies, what you can do is you can enforce a centralized governance. This is where you can apply backup standards to entire organization units or specific accounts. You get consistency across your accounts because it means that you can ensure that all of the workloads follow the same backup frequency and retention requirements. In addition, you can automate at scale. You can actually automatically select your resources by tags. For example, where you can set a tag for a particular resource. For example, you can set up a tag for a resource where the key is backup and the value is true, and then the backup policy will pick that up as a resource that needs to be backed up. And you can also ensure compliance and protection, maintain required retention periods, meet regulatory standards, and prevent accidental deletions. Let's take a look at a quick visual diagram to see how this works. So you'd log into the management account and access the AWS Organization Service. You would enable the backup policy feature, and then you would configure necessary backup policies that allow you to define backup schedules, lifecycle rules, backup vaults where you're going to actually store the backups, and any resource tagging that you require to identify your resource. Once that's all in place, you can then apply the backup policy to an organization unit, such as the development organization unit, and then any accounts within that organization unit is going to inherit the backup policy. Now, the backup policy will ensure that backups follow those defined rules that you have set up for when the backups take place, what the retention period is, when the schedule is, all that kind of wonderful stuff. And ultimately, with the backup policy applied to the dev account in this example, a backup plan will be generated as well as resource selection rules based on the taggings that you have defined. Now, the AWS Backup Service will automatically discover matching resources and create necessary backups. And so the AWS Backup Service will kick in and actually perform those backups. One thing to be aware of is that, like with any other service, the AWS Backup Service is going to require specific roles and permissions in order to access your account to perform those backup operations. Okay, so next let's go ahead into the AWS Management Console and actually set this all up. So we need to first log into the development account. We're going to set up a backup vault, and we're also going to define an IAM role, and then we'll go into the Management Console and create that backup policy to apply it to the dev account via the dev OU. Let's jump into the AWS Management Console of the dev account first. Okay, so here I am in my dev account. I am currently in the North Virginia region, but that really doesn't matter. What you need to do is basically go into the AWS Backup Service first. So here we're just going to go to AWS Backup. Just type in backup there. That's going to open up in a console window. Okay. And what you need to do is you need to go down to vaults and create a new vault. And we're going to call this vault, and I want you to use the exact name purely because in the policy we're going to be using this name. Obviously, if you choose a different name, then make sure your policy name is updated accordingly. So the backup vault name is just org backup vault. It's a backup vault that we're creating. You can assign it with a chosen KMS key. Okay. I'm just going to leave that as it is. Just leave the default KMS key, which is that one over there. So that's going to ensure that we're encrypting our backups. Scroll a bit further down, and what you want to do is you want to click on Create Vault. Okay, so that creates your backup vault. That's where all of the recovery points are going to be stored when the backups take place. Okay, so next we're going to create an IAM role. Now the IAM role is going to ensure that we have sufficient permissions for the AWS Backup Service to perform the backup activities. Okay, so in the search bar, go ahead and search for IAM and open that up in another tab. Okay, and in IAM, click on IAM roles. And in IAM roles, we want to create a new role. It's an AWS service role. Okay. So for the trusted entity, you want to make sure you select AWS Backup. Okay. Because that's our trusted entity, right? Go ahead and click next. And in the policies, we want to search for two different policies. The first one being the AWS Backup Service Role Policy for backup. So just select that one. And the next one is for the restore operations. So just AWS Backup Service Role Policy for restores. Select that as well. Go ahead and click next. Those are your two policies selected. The backup service is the trusted entity, and we'll give this role a name. And again, you can give it a name like org backup execution role, something like that will do just fine. Go ahead and click create a role. Okay. So we have our role created, org backup execution role. Okay. That's got the necessary policies, permissions, and the trust policy all in place. Next, let's go ahead and actually launch an instance that we're going to be backing up. So I'm going to open EC2 instances in another tab. And I'm going to launch a quick Linux instance for us. Now, we've not covered EC2 instance yet in any detail in this section of the course. That's coming up in an upcoming section. But an EC2 instance is basically a virtual server that you deploy in the cloud that can run a Linux, Mac, or Windows operating system. And it could be any of those popular Linux distros you are aware of when it comes to Linux, like Red Hat, SUSE, CentOS, so on and so forth. Ubuntu, so on and so forth, right? So when you go to the EC2 management console, this is where you can launch your EC2 instances. And like I said, we'll cover this in a lot more detail in the EC2 section of the course. For now, I just want you to click on instances, click launch instances, give your instance a name. We're going to call this my web server. Select the Amazon Linux machine image. We'll talk about machine images in the EC2 section. That's just basically an image that has the operating system and any necessary applications. Scroll down and make sure you're using the x86 architecture. You want a T3 micro instance type. Okay, this gives you basically 1 GB RAM and 2 virtual CPUs. Again, we'll talk about this in a lot more detail in the EC2 section. For now, basically, this is a really low-end, low-spec machine because we want to keep costs to a minimum. We don't want to incur any unnecessary charges. When it comes to the key pair, go ahead and select proceed without a key pair. Okay. And network settings, we're going to leave this in the default network. So this is known as the default VPC. Again, we'll talk about VPCs and networks in an upcoming section in this course. But for now, I just want you to select whatever is there as default. For the security group, you need to identify a security group. Just select an existing security group and select the default security group if you have that one. Okay, just select the default security group. That will do just fine. And scroll a bit further down and pretty much we are all good to go. Okay, now right at the top of the page is where you have the name of the server where you can define some additional tags. So go ahead and click additional, add additional tags. Create a new tag, and we're going to call this backup. Make sure you have the exact spelling and uppercase and lowercasing. And the value, we're going to set that to true. Okay. And basically what we're saying that if this particular server has a key of backup and a value of true, then we want to back it up. That's essentially what we're doing here. Okay. Go ahead and click launch instance, and that will launch your server in the default VPC, which is a default network in the North Virginia region in the United States. Okay, let that come up. Okay, that's going to take a few minutes to initialize and come up. I'm going to pause the video here and come back once it's all done. Okay, so that's my server now up and running, and it's passed its checks. So you can see the status check is 2 of 2 passed. This means that the server is all up and running and everything is fantastic. If we click on the server very quickly, you'll get details of its IP address, its host name, etc. I want to draw your attention to the tags part, and you can see that the name is set to my web server and the backup is set to true. So the key called backup, that's being set to true. That's really important. Okay, so next we're going to log into the management account and set up the backup policy in AWS Organizations. So I'm going to quickly come out of this and basically log out of this and log back in to my management account. So let's very quickly do that. Okay, so what you want to do is you just want to put the email address of your management account and log into your management account. Right, so we're going to go into the AWS Organization Service. And the first thing you want to do is you want to enable backup policies. And if we go down to policies and scroll a bit further down, you will see that we have backup policies just there. That's currently disabled. You want to go into that and enable that. That's the first step. Okay. Now, this will ensure that your backup policy is activated and available to you to be able to perform those exercises. Next, what you want to do is you want to go to services, and here you want to go down all the way to where it says AWS Backup. That's currently not enabled. You want to enable something called Enable Trust Access. Okay. And so you just want to select this box and ensure that you type in enable there and then click Enable Trust Access. Okay, so you've successfully enabled trusted access for your AWS Backup. Okay, and we'll go ahead and just close that for now. And then go back to policies again, go to your backup policies, and here we can create our policies. Okay, now I've got a policy for you attached to the resources section of this video and in our GitHub repository. Let me just quickly bring that up. Okay, so this is the backup policy that's available in the GitHub repository. You can just download this and use this. Let's take a look at exactly what the policy covers at a high level. So I'm going to be basically applying this policy in the US East 1 region. So those are for my service and the development account in the US East 1 region. When you configure the policy, you can use the visual editor or you can use this JSON script. So you can build out your JSON script or you can go ahead and use the visual editor. The choice is yours. Here we're setting up a schedule expression, which is a cron job. If you want to know a little bit more about what cron jobs are, they essentially allow you to define schedules for day, time, day, week, month, year, that kind of thing. And there is a resource available to you in this section just below where you can read a bit more about cron jobs and how to set those up. This particular backup policy is going to run within a backup window of 1 hour. There are 2 hours allocated for the backup to complete, and the retention period for the actual backup recovery point is set to 5 days. This is the vault in which the recovery points will be stored. Remember, we set this up in the development account, and that's the IAM role that we defined earlier that this is going to need in order to run the backups. And you can see here we've set up the tags. So the key is set to backup and the value is set to true. So only those instances that have got this tag are going to be backed up. Right. Let's just copy all of that very quickly and go back into the AWS Management Console in the management account. And I'm going to go ahead and click in policies, backup policies, create a policy. So we'll give this policy a name. Okay, so that's the name. In fact, we'll just call this policy. Okay, and we'll go down and I'll go to the JSON editor. And in here, just paste in the JSON file. Okay, so right, so that's the JSON file. Go all the way down. I've got everything else in place. Go all the way down and click create policy. That's going to create my backup policy. And you can see that's all ready to go. Okay. So the next thing that we have to do is we need to attach this policy to the relevant targets. Okay. So here I'm going to click on targets and I'm going to click attach. And I'm going to attach it to the development OU. So these are all of my development accounts. Obviously, we only have one development account for the purposes of this course, but you could have multiple. And so this policy is being applied to the development account, which is going to filter down to, the EC2 instances, specifically in that region. So that's US East 1 for any servers that have got those tags in place. So we're applying it to the development OU, which is best practice. You can apply it directly to the account, and you would do that from time to time if there was a policy specifically for a specific account. Right, let's go all the way down and click attach policy. Let's give this a few minutes to basically filter through. Okay, I'm going to pause the video here and come back once it's done. Usually if you give it about 5 minutes or so, that should be enough. Okay, so I'm now logged back into my development account. Okay, so previously we were in the management account. I went into AWS Organization and you saw I created the backup policy after all of the other configurations that were done as a precursor to get to that stage. I've now logged back into the development account and I want to show you what's actually happened. So let's go into AWS Backups And in AWS Backups, if we go to the vaults, just to show you where the vault is again. So we had created that vault, as you remember. Okay. In addition to that, because of the policy, we now have the backup plan that's filtered across. So this is the daily EC2 US backup plan. So if I click into that, you will see that the backup plan was created from AWS Organisations Policies, and we can't edit or delete it from the member account. Okay, and that's perfectly natural, right? So if you want to make any changes to this plan, you got to do it back in the AWS Organization Service of the management account. Furthermore, if we scroll a bit further down, the backup policy was set to complete backups at 1400 hours UTC. It's probably not a good time to be doing backups, but I just wanted to illustrate a point. Okay, so anyway, we've got all of those dates that are filtered down from that JSON. Okay, so now we know when the backups are going to run. In addition to that, this is the backup rule. So the backup rule specifically states that that's the rule name, that's when it's going to happen on a daily basis. It's going to start within 1 hour, complete within 2 hours. The retention period is 5 days. That's the backup vault. All of that is being filtered down from that backup policy. Now, when you first set this up, if you now go into protected resources, this is going to be empty for you. I've currently got a protected resource. That's the web server that I'd set up earlier in my development account. If you remember, if I take you back to the EC2 management console, where I had deployed a web server. Okay, so if I go into instances, there's the web server that was deployed. And as you remember, it had the tags of backup set to true. So if I go into my backup, AWS Backup, there it is there. It's picked that up because of that tag. Now, when you first set this up, you're probably going to see that there's nothing in here. Even though you've got this backup tag in place, this will not show up immediately. This only shows up the first time the backup plan actually runs. Okay, so if my backup plan is going to be running at 1400 hours on a daily basis, you're going to have to wait for the first time for the backup plan to initialize before you will see your resources that are going to be backed up in the protected resources. And I allowed this to run. Okay, this was done yesterday. And so this ran and it did the backup. And as you can see, it identified the resource that it's going to back up, which is this particular instance that ends in 227. So we can cross-reference it there. There it is, 227. Okay. And specifically, if I now go into the backup plans again, scroll all the way into the daily backups, go down and look at resource assignment, you will see my EC2 backup. Okay. So this is my EC2 backup. This was run yesterday. Okay. And furthermore, if we go to the backup jobs, there is my backup job actually completed. So I can go into the backup job and I can see the backup that actually took place of my root volume of my EC2 server. So there's the backup plan. There's the role, the IAM role it used. There's the rule that it was used. There's the vault. So we can now go into the vault as well. And there is my recovery point in the vault. Okay, so my backup is now taking place every day with the retention period set to 5 days. There it is. The retention period is set to 5 days. And I didn't set up the transfer to cold storage. That's something else you can do. But hopefully you can see how we can enforce backup strategies across the AWS organization for all of our resources by tagging them correctly and defining those backup policies. That pretty much brings us to the end of this video. I'll see you folks in the next one. Thank you.